This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday. My program today is mostly an interesting show that was taped by Alexa Ross when she and I went up to Columbus on October 7th to the public policy luncheon that was put on by Action Ohio, the Coalition for Battered Women. They have been doing public policy programs like this now for over a dozen years. And the subject is not necessarily something that directly involves the question of domestic violence. In fact, today's program is called The Road to the White House. Are we there yet? And the speaker is going to be Dr. Joan McLean from Ohio Wesleyan University in Delaware, Ohio, who is a professor of government there. And she is going to talk about the things that are probably necessary before a woman could become president of the United States. Now, of course, in the 2008 election, we had the Democratic Party with the unusual opportunity of having both a Democratic woman, Hillary Clinton, and a Democratic man, Senator Barack Obama, as the candidates in the primary. And of course, it was Barack Obama who won the primary and later went on to become president of the United States. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background to the tape which will be shown. One of the very first person I think we see there is going to be Linda Hengst, the retired director of the Ohioana Library. The Ohioana Library has been going for a long, long time, almost 90 years now, and it was begun by one of the first ladies of Ohio, Mrs. Cooper, I believe in 1929. I have here a book called Profiles of Ohio Women. This book was published by Ohio University Press in 2003 for the bicentennial of the state of Ohio, which was admitted to the Union in the year 1803. This Profiles of Ohio Women included 200 women over the course of those 200 years, but not like, one from every year or anything like that. There are many more modern women in the book, living women actually, than you might expect. However, Profiles of Ohio Women was set up by several people that I know quite well, one of whom is Linda Hengst, the retired director of the Ohioana Library, because I have worked with her in the group called Ohio Women Incorporated now for about 20 years, really. Another person who was on the committee that chose the women and set up the whole idea of this Profiles is Nancy Rose. Both those women were present at the event on October 7th. And they mention also important woman who was a co-founder of Action Ohio Coalition for Battered Women, and that is Grace Williams. Grace Williams was she was a black lady from West Virginia, and she was a founder of the Battered Women Coalition in the year 1976. She came to Ohio in 1943 during the Second World War and was very important in the YWCA, serving both the Columbus YWCA as president at one time and later as president of the Ohio Councils of the YWCA. And you'll notice that Linda Hanks refers a good deal to the YWCA because she has been very involved with it over the years as well. So now we will go to the tape which shows the program Road to the White House by Dr. McLean.
I'm Linda Hanks, and I have been active with helping the founding of Action many, many years ago. And I wanted to just say a few words about the founding of Action. Already Phyllis made the comment about Grace Williams. Grace was on the task force that helped determine that the greatest need in the state of Ohio for women and girls was attention being paid to domestic violence, or at that time, battered women. That was back in the early to mid-70s when the Council of Ohio YWCAs asked Helen Mulholland, also a co-founder of Action, to study the needs of women and girls in the state of Ohio that were unmet. Helen and Grace did a good deal of surveying, asking clergy, hospitals, judges, police officers, social workers, what they saw as the need that wasn't being met. And resounding, the answer was domestic violence. There was little legislation to protect domestic violence victims at the time. There was only one shelter in the state of Ohio, and that wasn't really publicly acknowledged. It was a YWCA retired executive director from Coshocton, Ohio, who retired, moved to her family farm in northwest Ohio, and opened her doors very quietly to women around the state who needed a safe haven. With the help of Grace and Helen and the other members of that task force and the support of the Council of Ohio YWCAs, in Dayton, Ohio, a resolution was made to make the priority for the Council of Ohio YWCAs to seek domestic services for domestic violence victims and see that there was some legislative change. I was one of the fortunate, very young staff members of the YWCA at the time to serve with both Grace and Helen. Helen went on to work with NARAL and a number of other groups. Grace steadfastly stayed with Action for Battered Women. By the way, Grace was a former member of the board of directors of the Columbus YWCA. Action moved forward and actually broke into two groups. One providing direct services for victims, and the other, as we are today, with the Action Coalition, which places its greatest emphasis on public policy to help all domestic violence victims. And it's kind of interesting. Now we're even seeing the NFL taking some stands. Oh, they just realized that violence breeds violence. But what I give them credit for is speaking out, taking action, and punishing their players, the perpetrators. I just wanted to say thank you to Grace, thank you to Helen Mulholland, thank you to all of the YWCAs that supported the founding of Action more than 40 years ago, and a special thanks to Phyllis, who has, through good times and hard times, continued to see that Action continues and public policy is at the forefront.
I've asked Karen Rainey if she will do the honors and introduce our guest speaker because Karen knows her personally. So Karen?
Joan McLean, a politics and government professor at Ohio Wesleyan University, where she has taught since 1990. Joan has been active in feminist politics and political campaigns for more than 30 years. Among the highlights of those years, She was the political director for the National Women's Political Caucus in ER America, helping to elect pro-ERA candidates to state legislative offices. I first met Joan when I staffed a PAC supporting women candidates for state office here in Ohio, and she was a valued board member. She was also deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee, and she was part of making history and advising Geraldine Ferraro in her run with Walter Mondale in the 1984 presidential campaign. Ferraro was the first woman to be nominated on a major party's presidential ticket. Joan came to Ohio in 1985 to pursue her doctorate in political science at Ohio State University. Her undergraduate degree is from the University of Florida, so she obviously migrated north. Here to talk to us today on what it takes for a woman to be elected president is Joan.
To just salute all of you who are involved and supportive of Action Ohio. We have always needed Action Ohio, but we seem to have a resurgence in needing it even more, especially those of us who teach on college campuses and are interested in the new Title IX enforcement and the alarming statistic that 1 out of 5 college women will suffer a sexual assault. We know that a lot of the public policy that we care about is going to be in the years to come dependent upon the leadership that we elect at all levels, but especially the leadership that we elect at the presidential level with the appointments to the Supreme Court of those who head our agencies and programs. So I was delighted to be asked to talk about this today. I'm sort of taking an activist, political scientist point of view. The road to the White House, are we there yet? I want to say we're there, but we're not inside yet. We're sort of where those gates are, although nowadays maybe we can get up those gates and get it. Think about it. We have 20 women in the United States Senate. We have 79 women in the House. Now, yes, we'd like to have more, but we finally have a critical mass that not all women are defined by 1 woman in the Senate or 2 women in the Senate or the woman in a particular position. That's always been our problem with going up the ladder to higher office, is that we haven't had the critical mass from which to draw from. Unfortunately, we're going in the opposite direction as far as governors and state legislators. And that's important because when you read the bios of all the senators and most of the members of the House, they've come from local office and state legislative office. And we often see that senators and governors are the first ones to be talked about when we start thinking about a new presidential election cycle. Right now, we have 5 governors, 1 Democrat, and 4 Republicans. Having been the political director of ER America, National Women's Political Caucus, and the candidate recruitment coordinator for the Women's Campaign Fund, most of my work when it comes to recruiting women has been bipartisan in nature. So what I wanted to do today is sort of look at how someone gets there, and then look at who might get there in 2016 or later. Right now, early days, actually middle-aged days in the 2016 campaign, because we've had people running for a while. 2 years from now, we're going to be voting. Anyone that we want to encourage, support, has got to do all of this in 2 years. But first, they've got to win their nomination. Early days, it's all about elites. So if you were looking out there, you would see that there is probably only 1 woman who has the elites sewn up in such a way this early that we could say they have a chance at 2016. And that is former Secretary of State, former Senator, former First Lady Hillary Clinton. I believe that Hillary Clinton lost for the right reasons in the last election. I don't think it was gender. I think she ran a horrible campaign. The arc of history crossed again, as it has so often when minorities and women compete. All we could hope for is to be as competitive as men in any election that we're in. If Hillary Clinton decides to run, I think she'll run a much better campaign. She will listen more to her supporters and be more adept at answering her critics. So why is she kind of the gold standard right now? She's got access to money. She's got access to elites. She has the experience. And she is attractive to those that make up her party's voting strength. So she could actually win the nomination and then go on to be competitive in a general election in which she puts her progressive coalition with her moderates to win. Who on our Republican side can do that? I thought long and hard about this. Someone with the standing that could do this, and that's Condoleezza Rice. Also has the least support, could raise the money. I think either candidate has a standing with the international community. None of us would think that Condoleezza Rice or Hillary Clinton could not make the tough choices. But guess what? Condoleezza Rice can't win the nomination in her party. It looks more and more like Jeb Bush is going to get into the race, and I don't think that Condoleezza Rice would put her hat in the ring if that were the case. But she is too moderate. So you've got a Democrat that matches up. Some will say Hillary Clinton is also moderate, but not too moderate for the progressives who vote in the primary election for the Democratic candidate. Condoleezza Rice is moderate, but too moderate for where her party is right now. This time in the 2008 election, I don't think many of us knew Barack Obama. Hillary is in a unique position in that deciding not to does not mean that she's not going to make a mark on the world. Because with her foundation, she might be able to make a policy mark even bigger than with the constructs of elective office. Condoleezza Rice at Stanford, and maybe the commissioner of the NFL. So she too could make a mark on public policy. So let's say for whatever reason, those two either are out politically or take themselves out. Is that it for 2016? I think for the presidency it is. But I don't think for the vice presidency. So let me mention a few names. On the Democratic side, let's look at the Senate. And we have Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York. She's 47, so she's young. She's married, she's moderate, she's progressive. And I like one of the sets of issues she's put together, and that's transparency. She's one of the first, if not the first senator to put her schedule online, to acknowledge where she raises her money. I think she has an idea about where we're all headed, given our lack of support for and understanding of the paralyzed fight we see in the Congress. She knows how to work across the aisle. Of course, she will not make a move until Secretary of State Clinton announces one way or the other. What about on the Republican side? I think Callie O of New Hampshire is very interesting to watch. She's a United States Senator in her first term. A-W-O-T-T-E. She's married and has 2 teenagers. So she doesn't have young children, so she could go ahead and run. She is also got conservative credentials up the wazoo. She's pro-gun and took on Mayor Bloomberg about his gun control efforts. But she also works across the aisle on women's economic issues. And she supported a bill with Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota, who also could be in that candidacy. She's kind of in the Walter Mondale tradition. I think has a chance to win her party's primary, but more importantly, I think she has a chance to win the vice presidency and set herself up for a run after 2016, even if she loses. Downside is that she's a great senator right now, and whether she, at age 45, feels like she wants to wait. Now, some of you might say, well, of course, the only woman on the Democratic side has got to be Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi's in her 70s. It's not likely that she will make the run. And as far as the vice presidency, I think she would be much more instrumental by staying minority leader, or, for those Democrats who hope, getting back to be Speaker of the House. There are other Democrats in the House you might think of, but none of them fit the profile that are moderate enough to add to a ticket. Now, Republicans, they have a very interesting woman in the House, Kathy McMorris Rogers. She's from the state of Washington, and you probably have seen her because she's the one who has given the Republican responses to the State of the Union. Her standing is fourth in the leadership of the House in the Republicans. She chairs the Republican Conference Committee, which handles all public policy. There's only been one other woman to chair that conference. Anybody remember who? Deborah Price. And then there's this speaker from Ohio. He also chaired it. So she's in a position. But again, 2016 seems a long shot. She's 44. She married later in life, has had 3 pregnancies and deliveries since she's been in the House, the only woman to have been pregnant 3 times in the House that we know of. So she has young children, and her first child was born with Down syndrome. She's become an advocate in that area. So although she has the political standing, I think the personal concern she has, plus she's only 44, she's probably not going to do it. So let's go to governors. We have Maggie Hansen from New Hampshire. She's 56. She's just newly elected. She doesn't really come from a big state, nor does she have a big following. She probably will stay in that. We have Susana Martinez, a Republican. She is the first Hispanic woman, either party, to be elected governor. She used to be a Democrat. She was a prosecutor for a very long time. She was fired from that job for a conflict of interest with the person who later became her husband. She's bilingual. She is up for re-election, and she has an interesting stand on immigration that could serve her for the Hispanic community, which she captured 38% of the vote. She approaches it as a security issue, not an immigration issue. But she's up for re-election right now.
What state?
Arizona. Going back to the Democrats, you might say, gee, one governor? Well, in a way, it is the price you pay when you have the presidency. Because we lost 2 governors who could have been presidential material. Governor Sebelius of Kansas and Napoleon, I always say it wrong, both who went to head major agencies who've come under a lot of scrutiny. So if they have interest in higher office, it may be through the Senate route or down the road. Age can also become an issue. The last governor who's positioned politically okay in that her term is up and she can't run again is the governor of Oklahoma. She's 59, Mary Fallin. She is not right on the social issues for the general election, but right on where the Republicans are leaning or split. She's anti-gay rights, pro-death penalty. But she also has some adult children with controversy. Why do I mention these kind of handicaps? We started out with 20 women in the Senate and 79 women in the House and 5 women governors, and I've just talked about a handful. Everything has to line up so right, politically and personally, for women to get through early days. What do you do in early days? You get the consultants, you get the pollsters, you get endorsements, you get the elites. One of these women should be talking to Cleta Dethridge, who is kind of the mastermind. She too was a Democrat when she was a state legislator in Oklahoma. She became a Republican and is the go-to person for setting up national campaigns. The only one who Cleta has mentioned is Senator Ayotte, but I think for the future. On the Democratic side, where's Donna Brazile? Everybody is waiting for Hillary to make the decision. So you can't look out there and say that the Democrats aren't doing a good job in early days. They can't do anything right now. We should be seeing these women going to Iowa and New Hampshire and pressing the flesh. We would hope they'd be raising a lot of money, whether they're in a competitive race or not, so they could help other candidates. A lot of the steps it takes to put yourself into a position to run for president happens 2, 4, nowadays 6 years before the actual run. That's why I'm thinking these women have a chance, but not likely in 2016, except for Hillary. We as women probably are of split minds about why we want more women in office. It's only fair, with being a little over 50% of the population, that we have adequate representation. Mary Wollstonecraft said, maybe we're not equal, but until we get an equal education and equal opportunity, we'll never know that. There's a second reason that many of us want women in office. To this day, we live our lives differently than men. Therefore, when public policy is discussed, we want our voices and our life experiences in the room. And if that room happens to be oval in shape, we would like our voices to be the ones making the decisions. Now that puts us, women as voters, in a difficult position, especially those of us who are Republicans. Do we want a woman on the ticket simply because of gender, or because of gender and their policy stance? That's less of a concern for some Democrats. Democrats who are progressive. Democrats who are conservative, especially about choice, have the opposite problem. So this confluence of issues and partisanship is important in the 2016 election. And this group of women who we look at here, and you all probably could ask or add others, are going to be important as we go forward in trying to make this historic change. Will there be a woman for president in 2016? For the Republican woman, here's what you need. You need a map of where you are and where you're going. Clinton's going from the foundation to probably Iowa and New Hampshire, and maybe ending up at Philadelphia with enough delegates. Condoleezza Rice needs a hall pass out of Stanford to Iowa and New Hampshire, where she's been many times, and then through Cleveland. Picking up along the way Governor Kasich or Senator Portman. Wouldn't that be an interesting dynamic? None of us probably thought twice when I mentioned that these women would run for vice president. But I could tell by various shakes, Portman and Kasich would never be vice president to a woman. Therein lies the rub. Plus, I've not mentioned 2 of these women running together, right? Would we even think about that? How dastardly that would be. The first thing is, do they know how to get delegates? Well, you can hire people who know this. It's an art and a science. Remember, where did Hillary start to fall in the last presidential election? When she lost Iowa to Barack Obama. What are the caucuses in Iowa? It's the first step of like a 6-step process. He had no delegates after that. So here's the other thing all candidates have to learn. How do you deal with the 24/7 news cycle? When I worked and traveled with Geraldine Ferraro on the vice presidential trip, this was a savvy politician. This was a New Yorker. In the Daily News and the New York Times, from Archie Bunker's district in Queens that she represented. She thought she had it, being a part of the leadership in the House. Her maiden trip, we're going to the West Coast. She does great until she turns from the microphone. Somebody yells a question. That's Communications 101. Never answer a question once you leave the microphone. They ask, when are you going to release your taxes? And she says, oh, my husband said we're not. No matter what she said for that 5-day trip out west where we set records in the number of people that came out, the enthusiasm, they were already saying she's probably off the ticket. So I think the best hope is that we're on the road, we're competitively on the road, that we will probably have our best hope after the 2016 election. But if Hillary Clinton runs, we'll have to see how that is and see if in fact that she can make a difference. After your delegates, then it all changes again. Remember the Etch-a-Sketch? Romney's aide said, well, I've got the nomination, now it's an Etch-a-Sketch, I do this, and we change. Same thing here, is that now you have to go into a different direction. The process itself is daunting. Party politics are daunting. And you do have a life that you have to pay attention to and do it on your own time. So we always want to encourage women to run, but we want to be pro-choice about when. I'm open to questions.
What is your critique of Patty Murray from Washington State? At one time,
Yes.
Washington had a governor and 2 senators.
Yeah, they were the first, and now New Hampshire has an entire female congressional delegation. Of course, that's 3. A female governor. Oregon. Patty Murray on the economy, she's been fantastic. She chairs Budget Committee. She has worked across the aisle. She has tended to be more of a policy person than a political person that it would take to run for the presidency. When I say that Hillary is the gold standard, Elizabeth Dole was the gold standard for Republican women because she had the full package and the exposure. When I started paying attention to politics, I was very, very young. So my gold standard there was Margaret Chase Smith. Even though she came into Congress because she replaced her husband, she went on and distinguished herself in the Senate on her own and was the only person to take on McCarthy. And then we had Shirley Chisholm. We had Pat Schroeder. You might have asked me why I didn't include Sarah Palin. I think she's gone celebrity on us. If she were serious about running, she would have addressed her weaknesses. Instead, she's enhanced them. Doesn't mean that in early days she couldn't be formidable, because she has a following. And she has the ability to raise money. And she has the ability to take on the 24/7 media. But she also has the ability to be part of the 24/7 media. And I don't think many people think she can pivot in the general election in a way that would be believable.
You didn't mention Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is 57, so she's the right age. She has good outside experience, and she has taken on the mantra of trying to address middle and low income economic challenges. This is going to be petty. People from Massachusetts don't do very well when they run for president. Remember Dukakis. But the non-petty evaluation I have of Senator Warren is that she's too progressive for the general election. In many ways, she might be a good primary candidate for Hillary Clinton, because what we don't want on either side of the aisle is not to have strong challengers, else they won't be ready for the general election. Elizabeth Warren will hold up the issues that Clinton is the most dicey about having any stands on, which are the economic issues. I take Senator Warren at her word that not this time. I look to her to run, especially if the Republicans capture the White House.
Some of those senatorial people you mentioned a lot of them were from New England.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were vice presidential material, that's going to force the party then to pick a presidential candidate from a strong state somewhere else.
Yes.
And what's the likelihood of that?
Mentioning men now,
Yeah.
On the Republican side, Jeb Bush is going to be formidable. Our governor is going to be formidable to a degree. I was interviewed for Politico by Connie Schultz on this topic. His anger management could get him in trouble early on before he gets used to the 24/7 barrage. And I don't know what Portman and Kasich will do, since they're both interested. But they have to be treated as viable candidates, especially since some of the most conservative of the superfunders are looking at Kasich. He will be able to tout, more than likely, that he won re-election with 30%, 40% margin. That would be where a New Englander is thinking about vice president, or even a Westerner could go there. So you've got Bush in Florida. You've got two candidates from Ohio. You've got Perry from Texas, who says he's going to make another try. And Perry's an interesting case. A seasoned politician, understands the Hispanic population, had tons of money, and didn't make it out of the gate.
Florida and Ohio still makes it all east of the Mississippi.
You've got to count some of the states who are already red are going to stay red. And if you can break up a little bit of the Northeast and keep Florida and Ohio, and you're a Republican, you've won.
What do you think about Portman being able to make it out of the primary now that he's changed his stance on marriage equality?
It'll be more difficult for him. I think he has other problems. He, in a way, is like Jimmy Carter and maybe Barack Obama. They are wonderful policy wonks. They would make great prime ministers. But in our system, where you have to be a president and a king at the same time, they don't really seem to have the makeup. I don't know ego-wise whether a vice presidency would be something. Now, a Bush-Portman ticket, ugh, that could be pretty tough. Because Bush will need somebody probably from Congress to balance out.
Do you think the Republicans will look for a woman vice president?
I think they have to show diversity in some way. They might be able to do it with Governor Jindal from Louisiana. You're probably thinking she doesn't care about issues. I do care about issues. But unless you have the right combination, you're never going to get to talk about issues. You're going to be forgotten.
What about the two young brothers from Texas?
Yes, Castro's. Both now in Washington. I'm not sure that was a great political move for him. They would certainly be able to talk to a growing influence of the Hispanic community. I don't think they're either as ready for the presidency. You know, I've got Ted Cruz out there. Ted Cruz, who took on the Supreme Court yesterday, where it's blinking the same-sex marriage, who is going to introduce a constitutional amendment to make same-sex marriage unconstitutional. But in the right primary, with dividing votes, many people laughed when Ronald Reagan got into this. We'll elect an African-American state senator, community organizer, twice. So you never know once you start putting people up. It's all going to be not only who you are, but who are you running against? And what are your resources to counter the things that are going to be said? This will be the first election where not only can we speak as corporations, as individuals, but we as individuals can spend as much money as we want. And the Soroses and the Bloombergs and the Koch brothers are ready to do that.
A number of the possible candidates are too progressive.
Yes.
Are there any that are too conservative?
I immediately go to the Republican field, a point at which the Democrats were the conservatives and the Republicans were the party of Lincoln. We've gone back and forth. Remember who ran against Ford? Carter. I mean, you had them right here, both pretty moderate. Maybe Ford a little leaning here, but not with Betty around. You know, pro-choice, pro-ERA. Right now, as it stands, to win the Republican nomination, one has to be conservative enough on some issues. I think the party itself is trying to define what that means. I think Ted Cruz is too far, but I'm not sure about John Kasich when they have very similar stands on social issues. But it's the way one talks about things. On the Democratic side, the challenge is that this is just who votes in primaries and caucuses. More conservative on the Republican side voters come out, and more liberal voters, progressive voters come out on the Democratic side. And how can you pivot to the general election? Not change your mind, but change your emphasis and show that you can have a broader tent. Not give up your values.
What do you think it takes to get more women to vote?
Since 1980, we have outvoted men in the presidential elections. I think the question is, what does it get to get more variety of voters to vote? And as a political scientist, voters have to feel that their vote matters. They have to have pride in citizenship. And they have to believe those who are campaigning for office. Right now, those three things are at risk. As I tell my students, you know, we're in a great experiment about democracy, but it is an experiment and it's not guaranteed. It's hard to get young people back involved after the surge, after the Obama, because they're very disappointed in him. They had hope. Things would be different. Difference come in degrees, and it takes time, but young people don't know that yet. Minorities had hope that 50 years after the civil rights movement, we would not still be fighting whether they can get registered and vote. When you think of a 22-year-old, that the only people that they have had in their conscious mind as presidents are Bush and Obama. They have no comparisons. Many of us were raised in times where government worked. It did big things. Congress. Lowest approval rating. There's no expectation. So why should I go vote? I lived in the District of Columbia for 9 years. And so I used to say, hey, we don't even get to vote. You people send us these people. So don't say it's Washington. What are you guys doing? Don't we dislike Congress and like 85 or 90% of them are going to be reelected? How do you explain that to an 18 to 22-year-old? And then you got to go into gerrymandering and you got to go there, and then now we're getting a challenge that legislative committees can't do the drawing of districts because it's unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court's going to rule on that. I think we have to return to Saul Alinsky and do 20 by 20. 20 of us gather together and talk to 20 other people who talk to 20 other people. I think this was the brilliance of the Obama campaign, and it has been the brilliance of the right on some of the social issues. And then I think some candidate has got to talk to people like me. I'm a flaming liberal on social issues. I'm a fiscal conservative. And I'm moderate on foreign policy issues. Where do we go? As a party, right now, neither fit, because we usually don't treat all three of those categories equally. So right now, I'm more Democrat than Republican. But I grew up under a picture of Richard Nixon. My hero was Margaret J. Smith. I loved Nancy Landon Castlebaum. I thought she had the perfect mixture of things for president. But I also thought that Sally Ride would have made a perfect president. Who's going to challenge somebody who sits on top of a rocket and say they're not strong enough? And we would have had a great theme song. Ride, Sally, ride. So I think we're closer together than those elected officials we have in office realize. If an Elizabeth Warren could do that, if a Jeb Bush could do that, they can walk away with this election. But whether their respective parties will allow it is going to be the key.
Do you think climate change, energy policy will ever enter the conversation of the Republicans?
Yes, I think so. I think Senator Io is taking that on. Yes, I'm still a Democrat, little d, not big D. When we as voters ask them to, they'll do it. I still believe that. I just don't know quite how to get around the non-competitive congressional elections. That's what's really killing public policy right now. You can do nothing, you can stay on the extreme, and you can get reelected. There's no incentive to be in the middle and compromise anymore. Now the women in the Senate did it. They bipartisanly went together and brokered deals. One of the reasons we want women is because we have different skills. That's true, but not all women have those skills, just like not all men don't have those skills. So I'm optimistic if we can keep people engaged through this low point in our electoral and legislative history. Great questions.
It was great to hear you. It does give one hope for the future. Some of us would like to see change sooner than later. Before we close, I wanted to make note of the co-sponsoring organizations and have some of you who are representing those co-sponsoring organizations.
I am the president of BPW Ohio, Action Ohio for Battered Women. Our main thrust this year in BPW Ohio is supporting battered women, rape crisis centers and things like that to get out there and really do more than what we've been doing.
I'm Jane Miracle with Narrow Pro-Choice Ohio. I'm happy that we were able to sponsor it because the connection between reproductive rights and domestic violence and sexual violence is so key, and fixing them all is very important. So go out and vote, do it, bring all your friends, make sure you do it, go, go, go.
The ACLU with Adrienne Gaviola.
Hi, my name is Adrienne. Talking about electoral politics, our main issue, number one priority from now through and beyond the 2016 election is voting rights. We unfortunately lost the expansion of early voting, but that doesn't mean we stop there, right? We focus a lot on populations of people who have often been disenfranchised from the voting booth. Those with disabilities, those with criminal convictions. Because every presidential election you see people swoop in and they're students and they focus on women or Hispanic or whoever that demographic is that they want to focus on. And we're really focused on just maintaining access, that there's no barrier.
How about Nancy Brown standing up for the League of Women Voters?
I will also speak about voting rights because we have been involved in the lawsuit, which is still ongoing, even if we've lost at the moment. Very eager to get people out, take advantage of the early voting so that we can demonstrate that it is being used and is desired. We are concerned about minorities and poor people who have less access. And we're also been very involved with gerrymandering, judicial rights, and so on. Welcome any of you to join.
Okay, how about AAUW? Joanne, you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. I'm Joanne Bensler. This year is sort of focusing on several different issues, rape in the military. And if you have not seen the film, The Invisible War, see it. Because one of the clients in that film brought a case against an officer over her because she was raped, is from Cincinnati, and is still going through the courts trying to get that resolved. Sexual abuse in families, the silent witness program that was started at Bowling Green, charter schools, and the core curriculum, science and math for young women. I have been the camp director for the Be Wise Math and Science Camp for Girls for 25 years. We've had over 3,000 girls go through the program. There are about 4 or 5 other camps across the state that AUW has been out there promoting young girls in math and science. And
AUW at the national level has been putting out a congressional record of how our people voted for several years. And 2 years ago, we did our first state voting record, and the 2014 version is now available. If you go to the AAUWOhio.org website, you can find the voting record. There's an overview of the bills that we scored, and those had to do with public education, reproductive rights, domestic violence, issues that were primarily concerned with our public policy agenda. There's an overview of what the bills are, why we scored them the way we did, and then the voting record of our representatives on the...
Women Have Options is Ohio's independent statewide abortion fund, trying to make choice a reality for all Ohio women in spite of the attacks on abortion clinics in Ohio.
Zonta focuses on national and as well as international issues that impact women. This year, a few of the things we're working on internationally is preparing birthing kits to send to some of the women in other countries who often die because they're not prepared to have a good experience with childbirth. Addiction and human trafficking is on our agenda because they often overlap. and women and aging.
I'm Carol Hinton, president of the Ohio Council, Victims of Domestic Violence. This is something that has permeated our very souls. This is National Domestic Violence Month, the month of October, yet we see pink everywhere. And not to minimize cancer by any means, but it was our month first. We are about getting women, female leaders within the state of Ohio, just to run for office, be able to know how to do that. Our young women, to be able to grow up and understand that domestic violence doesn't have to be a way of life. Many of us who have run shelters have seen not only just recidivism, but it's becoming generational. Boys and girls are growing up with so much violence in their homes that they think that that's normal for them, and it's not. So our job continues to be a very, very difficult one, but we as women must band together so that we're not having to hide behind the shame of it or be able to seek the shelter that we need. And so our shelters need funding. That's getting less and less every year. I just heard a report that people of means are giving less money to charities, whereas those middle class and poor are giving even more. We as women have got to band together and make some changes there, because men seem to be the crux of all of this.
I'm Susan Bader, and first of all, I want to thank Phyllis. This is always a wonderful occasion and a reason to meet. But this year has been a phenomenal year for the Supreme Court, which I know we all know. And starting their new session today, Ohio now is having a conference on November 8th, where we are going to focus on the Supreme Court, on a Supreme Court 101. We're going to talk about how it affects legislation and where we can go from there. And I think it's really important that we know they're part of our three branches of government. So please, if you want more information, go to the Ohio Now website.
My name is Beth Lon. I'm from the Women's Fund of Central Ohio. Want to just let you know, actually, we have an event coming up. We're coordinating with Ohio State University, and Anita Hill is going to be here to present her film, Speaking Truth to Power, and she's going to be here on a panel to discuss it afterwards. So keep your eyes out for that on November the 6th.
This is Lois Whaley again for Women Today and Yesterday, and I hope you enjoyed seeing that tape called Road to the White House. And you notice that our government professor, Dr. McLean, went into the important things that women must do and everyone must do if they're going to be a serious candidate for president. Money, elite support, experience in important national and international affairs and the like. And I want to also now talk briefly about the fact that the Athens News, just this past Monday on October 14th, published a Women in Athens County for, I think, the 22nd year. Very interesting. Be sure to see if you can get a copy and see what these women locally think. Now I want to talk very briefly about 2 or 3 women with October birthdays. First, quite recently, October 11th was the 130th birth anniversary of Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the president who was served the longest as president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and then went on to an important role in the United Nations. Also, on October 13th, Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of Great Britain, and the first woman Prime Minister of Great Britain. Her birthday was October 13th. So those are 2 women with October birthdays. And now I want to talk briefly about one who is a local person with an October birthday. On October 5th this year, Maya Lin, born in Athens in 1959, turned 55 years old. I'm holding up a copy of her book that was published in 2003 called Boundaries. And Maya Lin, of course, was the architect of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The Vietnam actually less the veterans than a commemoration of all the service people who were killed during the Vietnam War. And she won over 1,400 applicants for the privilege of being the architect of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. She was raised right here in Athens, the daughter of 2 people who had been born in China but had very important roles here at Ohio University, her father being dean of the College of Fine Arts at one time. So Maya Lin, we need to remember her, and you ought to go out and see her memorial that she did in 2004 for Ohio University, which is a couple of acres near Walter Hall and Grover Center, and has, I believe, 18 bits of the computer card idea that she used for that, which has, I believe, 12 sunken card-like things and 6 raised card-like things. And a lot of people said, "Ooh, what is that?" But she has done an amazing amount of public memorials, and they've all been quite different from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, for which Maya Lin is the most famous. And this is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday.